You guys got your voices this morning? Yeah. All right. I'll go with verse 5. And the sixth, Ithream, the son of David's wife Eglah, these were born to David in Hebron. Now Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, why did you sleep with my father's concubine? May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath. Ishbosheth did not dare to say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. Good, said David, I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see me. So Ishbosheth gave orders and had her taken away from her husband Paltiel, son of Laish. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel and said, for some time you have wanted to make David your king. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole tribe of Benjamin wanted to do. Then Abner said to David, let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, and that the king had sent him away, and that he had gone in peace. You know, Abner, son of Ner, he came to deceive you and observe your movements and find out everything you are doing. Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into an inner chamber as if to speak with him privately. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and on his whole family. May Joab's family never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner. King David himself walked behind the bier. The king sang this lament for Abner. Should Abner have died as a lawless die? Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets. So on that day, all the people there and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. And today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak, and these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds. John 13:1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Then Lord Simon Peter replied, "Not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. I am telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. Very truly, I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. Amen. I'll make this fairly brief. From the Second Samuel passage, we see, of course, the murder of Abner, and you know, Abner was a commander, was the head commander of Saul's army, and Joab, of course, was head commander of David's army, and so they were rivals to an extent, and they get into this like little. Not even a war. They send 12 of their men each and have them fight each other, and then that escalates into a war. And Joab, his one of his brothers, there's three brothers, Asahel, goes after Abner. Abner tells him to, hey, don't come after me. Just leave. And then, but he wouldn't. And so Abner turns around and he spears him, and Asahel dies. And so now Joab is taking revenge. Now, having said that, what we see here is the difference between David and Abner and Joab. Meaning, if you see the very last verse that we read in verse 39, he says, right, David says this, may the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds, right? He talks about, hey, I'm the anointed king, but I'm weak. And these sons of Zeruiah, which is Joab, they're actually King David's cousins, by the way, but Joab and his other brother Abishai, they were too strong for him. But anyway, David entrusts that unto God, right? He's saying, hey, may the Lord repay them. One of the things that you may wonder about even Abner's actions, even though he was also a cousin of Saul, so he was a relative there, but um, Abner knew that David was the anointed king. But then he's the one with Ishbosheth, who was Saul's son, who was actually alive. He's the one who made Ishbosheth king and try to sustain this. But we see all along that Abner knew that God had actually anointed David. And then when he gets accused by Ishbosheth, that turns him against him. And then now he does this. And when you see him talk about it, it's like, well, God's already anointed him. So what we actually see is that this guy, again, for us, it may seem like, oh, that's so nonsensical. This guy's weird. But we do this in our own lives too, you know? And so maybe not like in this context, because this is a little bit foreign to us, but like, so he knows what God's will is. He knows who has been anointed, but then he just goes against it, you know? And made status as commander in chief and so forth. So he's trying to make something happen that is not even according to God's will. Okay. Now you have Joab, and maybe this one is not as egregious because Joab's on David's side supposedly, but like after Abner gets sent and he hears that David sent him away in peace, but then he's like, oh no, Abner, you got to come back. And so he lures him back and he kills him. And again, he's taking revenge for Abner, killing his brother. And again, he takes it into his own hands. And so David says, may the Lord deal with him. And of course, if you know the stories that continue, yes, Joab, his family Joab himself gets punished for his deeds. And so, there's a saying that if we worry so much about things that we cannot control, then those things will control us. And here, these guys, honestly, when God says vengeance is mine, like he really means that, because the ultimate justice is going to be served out by God. And of course, it's hard for us sometimes just to accept that, but in our human nature. But again, we see Joab taking things into his own hands and actually bringing curse upon himself, and Abner also taking things upon his own hand and creating this situation that ultimately gets him killed as well. Whereas David is actually now the king over the entire nation, and this guy has more control than anybody else in that entire nation, but he continues to entrust things to God instead of trying to seize control. And so, yeah, I mean, I really hope that, again, when we read the scriptures, we always need to read it from a first person perspective, not like third person. And so it's like, oh, Abner, how stupid can he be for doing this? And Joab, what a hothead. But instead, really reflecting upon our own lives and thinking about our own situations where I can tell you, even in a ministry context where I acted like Joab, maybe not like killing anybody, but just like taking matters into my own hands because I was frustrated by a pace of certain things or this or that, and then that would actually, not by my intention, but put me in a difficult place with a certain individual who may have been offended or this or that. And so, really learning to trust God is a lifelong process, but to really surrender unto Him instead of trying to exert control and starting to get antsy when things are not under our control. As far as the John passage goes, I love this passage and especially how it's introduced. So in John 13:1, it's talking about how Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to go to the Father. And it says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the very end. And this is how Jesus loved them to the very end, is through this action of washing the feet. Okay. And not only that, if you'll jump to verse 3, it says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, was turning to God. So he got it from the meal and he did this. So here is Jesus. He knew that everything was under his power, and then he chooses to do this very lowly act. So if you understand the cultural context here, there were many levels of servants in a household. And so the absolute lowest servants were the only ones who washed feet. If you are the master of the house and if you ask the other servants to go wash the guests' feet, they would not do it, because it was just such a, like, are you kidding me? Like, do you know, it's like, it's such a despicable, lowly thing to do. And again, we in America, we don't understand this very well because we live in a democracy where people are supposed to be equal and whatnot. But like in this society, everything was extremely hierarchical. So for Jesus to do that, and there's a reason why Peter was like, no, like, you can't do this to me. Like, it was that offensive to their psyche and their way of thinking for some, like, for the rabbi, for their teacher to do such a thing. And so really what you're doing is so humiliating in people's eyes even. And so, but this was how Jesus expressed. So again, like for us, it's like, yeah, we're familiar with this passage. Jesus washed people's feet. But like in that society and in those people's minds, this is like um completely, it flips their world upside down. It doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, Jesus follows it up twice. In verse 15, it says, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. And in verse 17, it says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And so, again, for us, it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, we all know this story, but Jesus is simply saying, hey, you need to do it. You will be blessed if you do it. That's it. And again, for these guys, that completely changed the way that they did life in their society. There was something that Christians were known for in that time, and it was so revolutionary, like that these guys actually wash each other's feet literally and symbolically. Like they would go low and do these things. It just didn't make any sense. It's like some of us have gone to India multiple times where there's still a heavy caste system. It's like the very top caste people going and eating with the lowest caste people and like actually sharing a meal with them. That's totally unthinkable. That never happens in India, right? And it's like you're flipping upside down every accepted cultural norm, and you're doing this. Like, think about Jesus eating with tax collectors and prostitutes, which completely offended people, right? It would probably offend people today. If I had a meal with prostitutes and that got in people's ears in the church, like it might, something might happen, right? But that's really like who Jesus was. And he completely obliterated what humans thought were accepted values, and he is showing a completely different value in the kingdom. So again, we know this story, we know what it means, but are we really willing to be humiliated, even in front of people's eyes, to actually serve? Because again, I don't think Jesus said it just because he thought it was a cool thing to say. I think he really meant it. He says, you know what? The greatest in God's kingdom are the ones who go lowest and who is a slave to all. I think, I don't know this because I've never been to heaven, but I think there will be a lot of surprises when you go to heaven. Like the famous pastors and these people that we think, oh yeah, those are gonna guys are gonna have the most rewards because they bore the most fruit or whatever. I don't think it's gonna be like that. You know, some of those guys might be very humbled. They might not amount to much. I am, again, I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty certain that there's going to be a bunch of anonymous nobodies in the kingdom of God who will receive great honor by the Lord because they chose to serve and be a slave to all. Again, easier said than done. It's one thing to know it and actually do it. I don't know if this will be all that relatable to you, but for me, like, even though I served at a Korean church for a long time because I grew up here in the States, like, some things are a little bit, it's foreign to me, and I was just talking to a brother of mine yesterday, and he was serving in this ministry and doing really wonderful things, and he stepped down. So I was like, well, what's going on? Why'd you step down? He's like, oh, like, it just became all about titles and so forth. And he felt like, like this guy was kind of getting offended because he was before him and he was supposed to be the leader. So he's just like, that's not what this is about. So I just stepped down and I let him, hey, you lead. And now he's just serving, as a nobody, a ground up, same organization, right? I'm like, that's awesome, And there's something that actually I heard recently recently that again, like I should know this because I started at Korean church for a long time, but because my mentality is not quite that Korean, like it blew me away because I just didn't get it at first. And in our pastoral department, in our mokebu, I heard, oh, it's a problem because uh, there's not enough chondosas. It's just all 목사님's, right? I was like, why is that a problem? I never even thought of like 목사 전도사, like that difference being like a thing. Like again, it shows you how stupid I was like in Korean church circles. But like, oh, if you don't have like you don't have anyone to like, you know, put them to work. So then basically what you're saying is, oh, you got a bunch of stiff-necked pastors who are not willing to serve. Like they need these guys, these assistants to put them to work, but then now it's a problem in that department. And to me, it just was like, um, I was actually telling that friend of mine yesterday, I was like, you know what, like you just gotta show grace because in Korean culture and society, I mean, because it's hierarchical, and it's not because they're like, like bad intention or lesser or anything like that. It's just that you need those titles, like, or else it doesn't work. It doesn't function, because I mean, you need to know exactly where people stand and so forth. And it's just for you being born and raised here, it just doesn't really fit. But you can't really judge that, And he's like, yeah, I understand. So I just dropped it. It's not a problem. So I understand that too, but like when I heard that that was becoming a problem in the pastoral department, like to me it's like, okay, at some point it's like understanding is, there's only so much you can understand, and there's also like biblical standards that we can use to actually discern and judge cultural norms. And to me, I think that's ridiculous. Like why do we become pastors? So that we can like, parade around church and have people like, oh, treat us well? It's like, no, we're here to serve. And if we're not willing to go low, I just think that we have um, surprises coming when we enter the kingdom, thinking that we were something, because people treated us as such at church. But then in God's kingdom, you turn out not to be much at all because we didn't choose to serve. And so I don't know. I mean, I speak this to myself as much as any of you here, that it's just a reminder. Dying to yourself is a daily thing. Going low is not an easy thing, because it goes against everything that our human nature desires. But that is actually what we need. That is what God's kingdom is about. And in God's kingdom, He flips all the values upside down, and He tells us what true greatness is. And true greatness is humility. True greatness in God's kingdom comes through service. And so I will stop here, and I will lead us into one corporate prayer. And of course, after that, you can feel free to pray as you see fit. Okay. Um, let's take this moment to pray that this word will bear fruit in our lives, that we will be people who really entrust God like David did, and not to try to take control, but really surrender. And secondly, that we would be people just like the way Jesus loved us till the very end, knowing that all power had been given to Him, and He chose to wash their feet. That we will be people who know how to be least here on earth, so that God will deem us people who are worthy to be honored in God's kingdom. And so let's really pray that for ourselves. And then after that, again, as I shared, feel free to pray with whatever prayer request that you have before the Lord. Let's pray together. Father God, I just want to thank you so much for your word. May your word truly be a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. May your words never become so familiar to us, Lord God, that we just listen to it, let it go in one ear and out the other. But Lord, may your words truly have effect. May it truly bear fruit in our hearts and our lives. So God, starting with me, especially me, God, I learn how to not try to wrest control. One thing I desire, but that I would trust in you.